Hey guys, welcome back to the Supercoach Swordplay channel. You're here with me, Janath, and today I'm going to present my final team reveal before a big 2025 is to go ahead. Look, we didn't get all the information we wanted to from round zero, just the two games being played. Some of those Don's rookies, we didn't get as much information as we wanted. Maybe Bailey Smith, some of these questions which we wanted answered from our preseason podcast last week just weren't able to be done so. But look, I think we still have enough information to put together a certain side, which I think is a bit different. Let me just preface this sort of team reveal by saying it's a bit different to the sides I normally select, but I think it is something that I'm quite happy with for now. Maybe some small tinkerings to go on until the end of round one. But without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I remember last time you guys were sort of like, oh, the locks, the mid prices, that sort of thing. It's not your cup of tea if you do it that way. And so I'm just going to go line by line this time. And I think who better to start off at our D1 position than Harry Sheezel? I think Harry Sheezel is just one of those players. Not too many words are really necessary here. It's just a simple lock into this team. Probably the last time we'll ever get Sheezel as a defender as well. And I think, yes, whilst he may be susceptible to a tag, and he may be put up forward. I think he's just one of those players that is really dangerous to Antipod, and he probably doesn't present value at his price. But when there's so much value in other lines, I think that it's almost safe to sort of lock in one of these players that can be a week in, week out captain option. I'm going to go with one more premium defender in terms of 500k plus, and that's someone that I've been very hot on from the start of the season, which is Jordan Clark. I think Jordan Clark, we saw last year, and I sort of mentioned in my first team reveal that he was one of the main beneficiaries of sort of Fremantle's quicker ball movement going forward at the end of last year. And I think that he should just continue to step into that role. We saw in the preseason game against Melbourne, yes, he did share his kick-ins again with Luke Ryan, but we saw that he's still able to rack up the ball. And I really see Fremantle using Clark as their main distributor off of halfback. From my D3 to D5, it's going to be a bit interesting because this isn't something that I've necessarily thought of doing, for instance, in previous years. But I think with just the scarcity of the good defender rookies, particularly in regards to the ones that you feel comfortable fielding, I think that this can sort of be offset by going with a bit of a mid-price madness, really, in defense. There's three players which I'm going to add in here. Two of them I've sort of locked in at the end of the Amy Community Series, and one of them sort of popped up, and I sort of was like, I'm in an iron whether to select him, and I think I'm just going to have to bite the bullet. And that player is Matt Roberts. So I'm going to add all three of these guys in. So it's Matt Roberts, Jaden Short, and Harry Perriman. I'll talk about all of these guys together. But I think with Roberts, one of the things that I was really looking forward to seeing from him was the fact whether or not he would be the main distributor. Now, whilst that may or may not be the case going forward long term. Particularly, I think one of the problems with the Sydney team structure at the moment is that Nick Blake is being forced to play very accountable, given the fact that you've got Tom McCartan, who's moved forward without Logan McDonald and without Hayden McLean in there. But when those two come back, does McCartan go back into defense, freeing up Blakey? I think this is just one of those things which you're not exactly sure about at the moment. But I think that may have ramifications down the line for Roberts. But look, now he has a 124 stuck into his scoring system. And whilst it may only last one round, I saw enough from him, having only one of 12 kick-ins for the game as well, to suggest that he has sustainable scoring patterns all over him. And I think one of the key things, which, just as I said, 1 out of 12 kick-ins means that he's not totally reliant on the kick-ins to be able to score. So in that sense, I felt comfortable now seeing the Amy Community Series game against Gold Coast and the game against Hawthorn on the weekend to suggest that he is not exactly going to be a top 6 defender, but closing in and about there. So someone that we can use as a stepping stone. Jaden Short as well. I think now that Daniel Rioli is gone, it's not the only piece of the puzzle there, but we saw in the week that just went by that Adam Uze also mentioned the fact that they're looking to go into a bit more slower transition and ball retention mode. With Richmond were, I think, had the second fewest kicks last year, which for a team that's always typically on the back foot in terms of the defense is something that's a bit counterintuitive. But I think now that Uze is trying to go into that ball retention mode to sort of slow down the game a little bit, let the youngsters get into the game a little bit more. And I think Jaden Short should be the main beneficiary of that. two things which I really like to see which I really liked from his Amy Community Series game was, one, the fact that he was running off the back of stoppage, getting those sort of hairball receives from clearance, from your Tarantos, those types, but also the fact that he was calling for the ball. And I think I've been hammering home about this, and I see with Sheasel, I see with Clark, I see with Roberts, is that they call for the ball as natural halfback distributors, and Jaden Short should really be in a position, again, much like Roberts, to be a stepping stone in this team. Harry Perriman is the other one in there. And so that core makeup of the three mid-prices really helps to offset the lack of, there's not really any mid-price options. Maybe Griffin Logue, maybe a Wayne Malera in there that really pops my eye as a defender mid-price. And now that Callum Mills has gone down. So I think just paying up for that higher amount to go for Perriman is where I think I feel most comfortable. And one of the things which reminds me a lot about Perriman is George Hewitt. Back in 2022, when he first came to Carlton, came from Sydney, was playing sort of the defender, but he was also playing as like a defensive midfielder in some way as well. But I think Perriman now can step into a very similar role in a very similar midfield. You've got the superstar there in Dacos, like how we had Cripps. But now with Perriman in there, he should have high tackle numbers and he should have high sort of distribution as well. And we saw on the weekend that I think he had about 25 touches as well. Yes, he only got to a 93, but Craig McRae did mention that they did put him back into defense in that fourth quarter just to stem the bleeding after Nick Dacos had to go off with cramps. So that's why I've gone with those three there. And look, there's a couple of omissions in terms of the upper end players. Two of them being Dane Zork and Lockie Whitfield. I'm going to get to my midfield, and you may see why I don't have Dane Zork in there. And that we've done a lot of defense versus position data, third man up with Roscoe and myself. And Dane Zork has an insane run to start the season. But it's very weird because it's like paying $610,000 for a 36-year-old feels so counterintuitive, especially one that has had soft tissue injuries. But without Kadeem Coleman in there, feels almost like a pick that is a very risky antipod. But given the multitude of value which we have in defense, I'm comfortable going with the big boy in Sheasel, the player that I believe can push himself into the upper echelon of the top six in Jordan Clark, and those three mid-prices to back that up. And the same reign goes for Lockie Whitfield as well. In terms of the rookies, I'm going to go with three of them. So Zach Reid is the one which tentatively is on field for me at the moment. I've gone with Ben Patton, and then the other one who I am going to go for is Luke Traynor. Here we go. So with regards to Zach Reid, I think that if he stays injury-free, and this is the problem, and this is the main reason why I have a parachute option in Ben Patton on the bench. Because let's say that Zach Reid, Luke Traynor, and James Leake were my three sort of defender rookies. If one of them gets injured or if one of them gets dropped straight away, then I have very limited flexibility on that bench. And so Ben Patton having that forward status sort of just gives him that upper hand in comparison to a James Leake, for instance, who scored very similarly. With regards to Zach Reid, though, the reason why I think he seems the best off the three to put on field is given the fact that he does have a semi-decent role. He's not playing pure lockdown. He's got a little bit of intercepting, but he was also taking kick-ins in that community series game against Geelong. So I think this may be the fingers crossed that he stays injury-free. And I was very hesitant to start Zach Reid, particularly given the fact that, yes, he has those injuries. And if he gets injured again in round one, we may never see him again for the season. But I think given the fact that he has had no injury issues over the preseason, this is the best he's ever felt as well. I think that it's a pretty safe pick, hopefully, to get at least 6 to 7 games out of him to generate that cash generation. And look, for Essendon fans, hopefully he's a pillar of the future in the defense as well. Ben Patton showed enough signs in the weekend to suggest that he's a good bench option. Look, he could go on field, but I think one of the things which I sort of have a bit of worry about is he had a couple of goals scored against him, particularly by Dylan Moore in the game, and he may be the piece that goes out for Harry Cunningham. That's yet to be sort of made sure. But I think that Patton played a good enough game to give himself a couple of weeks in that team, because the Swans team is one team that's really hard to crack into. But I feel like Ben Patton has seamlessly fit himself into that team, and that's why he sort of was named for round 0 as well. And then Luke Traynor, yes, he wasn't sort of he didn't play the first half of the the Amy Community Series game against Collingwood, but the score, I think he was 49 or about 50 points in only about 30% time and ground. It shows his scoring pedigree right there. Arguably the best defender that was in the 2024 AFL draft class. And given he's going to debut for Richmond against Carlton on Thursday night, I think he's just going to be one of those players that Richmond will toy with. Hopefully that he stays injury-free. That they will toy with and allow him to sort of prosper or develop, let him get through those growing pains. And he's one of those rookies where I feel he may be a slow burn, but we can't really expect 50 points from 30% time and ground every game, but he may be a slow burn that we just have to monitor. Let's now move into the midfield. And in the midfield, I'm sort of going with a 2-2-4 structure in terms of the on-field players. So what I mean by 2-2-4 structure is 2 uber premiums, 2 mid prices, and 4 rookies. Just before I go on to the midfielders, the question may come with regards to why James Leake isn't on the bench, given we've already seen a game from him. The major reason for that I see is that Tom Green will come back this week. And if Green is named in the same side along James Leake, then yeah, sure. He's a much better pick. But I just suspect, given the way that GWS play, they're probably going to have to restructure around Kieran Briggs. Is Leake the one that goes out for Tom Green? And then Jesse Hogan's to come back into the team. I just feel like there's a lot of moving parts in the GWS side. And that's why I haven't gone with James Leake in. And he was also playing a bit forward in round 0. With regards to the midfield, I'm going to go, as I was mentioning, 2 uber premiums. And that's going to be Lachie Neale. And then I'm going to go with Andy Brayshaw. So, look, I know that this may not be the most pod-like midfield structure with Neale. He's 25% owned, and with Brayshaw, he's 11% owned. So, especially with Brayshaw, he's a little bit more on that poddish side, but I feel like a lot of the in-tune coaches have come to realize that Brayshaw's price is quite undervalued given his potential output, particularly as he started last year with a bit of injury and came home like a steam train. There's a couple of teams across the league that I really want to piece off their midfield in, and that's Adelaide, Brisbane, Carlton, Fremantle, Gold Coast, and Port Adelaide. And what you guys will see in this side is that I've tried to take at least one piece of the midfield from 5 of those 6 teams, with Gold Coast being the exception. So Brisbane is fulfilled by Lachie Neale. And the reason why I really like Lachie Neale is, one, he had an injury-free whole preseason. I was burned so much by him last year. Dia and Spills were rubbing it in a lot about the fact that, you didn't start Neale, you didn't trade in Neale, you traded in Dunkley instead, and he was a nightmare to watch. And given the fact that he then said he was struggling with that ankle injury for most of the end of the season, just rubs the salt in the wound, because it's like, if Neale is performing like that at 75%, when we look at some of his scoring, 149, 179, 143, 166, you're really like, well, what else can this man do? He's 31, so he's getting up there in age, but I think one of the things which really sort of allures me into this pick is given the fact that he starts off the season playing, yes, Sydney, arguably a tough matchup, and he may get the James Jordan tag. But look, that's just something we're going to have to deal with. That score will only stay in his price cycle for one game, given they didn't play in round 0. But then when you've got West Coast, Geelong, Richmond, Bulldogs without the Bont, most likely, and then we saw against Collingwood as well just how sort of porous they are, even to like a Finn Callahan type, who's a superstar, by the way. I think that Lachie Neale should quite quietly, or maybe not quietly, actually build himself into the season. And I think I have him projected as a top 8 mid. And yes, we'd probably pay enough for him as a top 4 mid, really. But I see him as a long season keep as long as he stays injury-free. And one of the other things which I really like about him is some of these double-up matchups they play. So, yes, they've got Collingwood twice. They've got Gold Coast twice. Gold Coast was quite a tough matchup, easy matchup. Last year, they got Geelong twice, another sort of easier midfield matchup. So there's a couple of really good matchups in here that I really want to sort of get out of Lachie. And I think he's just going to be the catalyst to get into Brisbane going or aiming to go back-to-back. With Brayshaw, as I mentioned, another one of these players that sort of has a really friendly fixture run. And when you play West Coast twice in any year, I think he's just one of those sort of, well, that's the beauty of playing for Fremantle, isn't it? I think with Fremantle, one of the other things which I really like to see is how tight their midfield rotation is. So you've got Sarong in there, who's now sort of playing forward as well. But Brayshaw, we've seen, he just signed a contract on to near the end of, I think it's about 2030 or 2031. And so now they've locked in that core trio then, Hayden Young, Andy Brayshaw, Caleb Strong. When Young comes back in, we may see that is the tight core rotation there. And when we saw some of his scoring from the end of last year for Brayshaw, 137, 137, 137, 77, yes, admittedly a poor score, 147, 127. I think we're not really going to expect these scores, but we saw in that preseason game against a strong Melbourne midfield as well, that he has the avenues to score. And he sort of had a higher or lower kick to handball ratio than I would have liked to have seen in that game. But I saw enough for him to lock him in. And he's been one of those players that it was always Brayshaw or Sarong from my first team picker. It was just which Fremantle midfielder would I go for? And I think I've sort of settled on Brayshaw here. Sarong's probably the first tag target as well. And so that gives a little bit more sort of protection going with the Brayshaw pick here. But I don't think Sarong is a bad pick at all by any means if you have the budget. I'm then going to stack my midfield with two sort of mid-prices, and that is Clayton Oliver and Adam Shearer. So I don't really think much needs to be said about Clayton Oliver, given the fact that he's 62% owned. He's averaged 120 for living, basically, one of the Supercoach sort of Hall of Famers. 450K. We saw just how good he looked. And I think when we're looking at that Amy Community Series game against Fremantle, we're not necessarily thinking about the score, which was 130, the goals, 3 goals, the touches as well. But what I think we really want to be looking at is just how good he looked to the eye. He was spreading the ground. He was calling for the ball. And there's another player that I'll add into this team a little bit later on that was sort of royalty of Supercoach past, but has got those traits back. The hunger, the way that he travels the ground, and the way that he calls for the ball. And Clary passes all three of those metrics. And for 450K, I think he's just an easy buy, easy sort of starting pick there. Adam Shearer is a pick that I've sort of had for about a month now. I wouldn't say he came in and out of my side by any means, but he's just one of those players that's a structural piece, because when you go with the Shearer, you're sort of locking yourself out of maybe going with a Peatling and a Ollie Hollands, for instance. But I think Shearer has the potential now. And as I mentioned, Carlton is another one of those teams with Brisbane, Fremantle that I mentioned that I just want to get a piece of in terms of that early fixture run. And when we look at Richmond, Bulldogs, Collingwood, West Coast, North Melbourne, Geelong, all in the first 7 weeks, it's just one of those picks where, yes, it may fail because he gets injured. And that's always the risk that you take with a player like Shearer, a player you take with a Rankin Zorko, because they may get injured in the start of the game. But I think one of the beauties of having two things. One of the beauties of having the flex position means that you can sort of offset a little bit of that early game injury risk. But the other beauty of having sort of the best sort of starting a chair is the fact that you're protected in 3 of the first sort of 4 rounds. And that's really good because Shearer plays Hawthorn, Bulldogs, Collingwood in those games. And if he does, for some reason, get subbed off or get injured and he's not scoring too well, you sort of offset that risk. Yes, it's not ideal from a 450K sort of mid-price here, but he has pedigree of scoring averaging 110, which he did in the 2023 season. And there was a stretch where he averaged 121.1 between round 6 and round 16 in 2023. And that included 7 scores of 125 plus, which I think you're not really expecting that from a mid-pricer like a Shearer. But I don't know if he's going to get right back to that, but I feel like he has enough opportunity to do so. So you may be wondering, and based off of round 0, is Will Day or Finn Callaghan in this team? Right now, they're not. And it's nothing to say against them. In fact, I'm a big Finn Callaghan truther. When asked to give my hottest take for the year, I had that Finn Callaghan would be a top 8 midfielder. And that was even with Tom Green in the side. And so now that he's gone out, everything that I expect from Finn Callaghan came true. My only concern with a pick like a Finn Callaghan is, yes, when Tom Green comes back, it may benefit him because it gives him more opportunity not to be so much the extractor, but then the distributor. The concern I have with the Finn Callaghan is that we've never seen him do it for any stretch of time before. Whereas we've seen him with an Oliver, we've seen him with the Chera. And so when I go back to thinking about Finn Callaghan, he himself is not free of his injury history. He's got chronic shoulder issues that has happened over the past couple of years. But in terms of his scores from last year, 116, 122, 104, 101, 114, 107. The big deficiencies that GWS have got rid of have been Peatling, Perriman, Cumming. Yes, Peatling probably impacts the role of Finn Callaghan, but I just don't know about whether I trust him fully to sustain it for a period of 4 full season. And you probably don't need to. And the fact that he now has 140 in his price system for at least a couple of rounds is a good thing. Now, if he comes off all guns firing and he puts together these couple of scores before his buy next week, actually, you can actually go on to him before the first price changes. So his price won't change any quicker than any of these other round 0 guys would. Any of these other round 1 starting season guys would. And that's a real luxury because I think there are a lot of speculative picks in our side that he seems like one of those players that you can sort of flick if a Chera for some reason doesn't do so well. A Perriman, a Short, a Roberts. You can flick the Callaghan to them and then you can sort of go in that direction. So that's the reason why I'm not starting Callaghan. And for that same reason, I think slightly different reason, Will Day as well. Another one of those players where it's, why don't you start him sort of thing. He also has 140 in his system. It was 110 at halftime. And you're always thinking, if he scores 200, how can you leave him out in that way? But I think that given the fact that we saw Will Day attract that attention from James Jordan at halftime from a team that wasn't tagging in the first half, just goes to show just how vulnerable he is as a tag target. Now, with James Jordan also having that syndesmosis injury, it is possible that Day is able to get more of that CBA role. But until a Cal Shadia, until a Mitch Lewis come back, what is to say that Day doesn't play a little bit more forward, given the fact we saw him kick 3 goals? And that James Sicily, whilst, yes, he's the perfect Swiss Army knife in a way, is not really the player that you want to stick up forward for the whole game when he's so deadly down back. So I think Will Day and Phil Callaghan, for those reasons, are 2 players that are just can't really justify starting. But if they come out hot, especially with Will Day, he's got Essendon, Carlton, GWS, Port Adelaide. We've seen those teams tag in the past, especially GWS. Toby Bedford is already eyeing off that matchup. I can assure you that. So he's just one of those players that for now, I'll probably just pass on. Okay, so now let's move on to looking at these rookie options on field. And when I was sort of contemplating which rookie options that I wanted to start, I was probably thinking about the best balance between job security and scoring potential and role. And so what I nutted that down to is thinking about these 4 rookies on field, and that is Nathan O'Driscoll, Elijah Sartis, Finn O'Sullivan, Mitch Nevitt, and you're probably wondering where's the big elephant in the room, and that's Levi Ashcroft. I'll get on to the reason why he's on the bench at the moment in just a tick. But with regards to those 5 rookies, I think those are the 5 right now are close in that 80% to 100% should start territory. And I think all 5 of them have good enough job security, have good enough roles, and should have good enough scoring potential as well. With O'Driscoll, he's just one of those players. Yes, he sort of played a really good game against the Indigenous All-Stars and sort of came onto our radars. But I think what was really telling for us is as soon as he wasn't injured last year, the fact that he came straight into that Fremantle side to accompany Jeremy Sharp on the opposite wing. So I think he's got the scoring potential. And we even saw him play a little bit inside midfield against Melbourne in that Amy Community Series game. And look, if Hayden Young isn't there and you have O'Driscoll, they're quite similar players in a way. And that given the fact that they can both go forward at the ball, we saw O'Driscoll take a couple of nice marks going back with the flight as well. And I think that the same things that I mentioned about Brayshaw with O'Driscoll should come true. He's priced at 37. I can see him averaging about 70. And that would be enough to make 150K and really be a good cash generating rookie for us. Elijah Sardis is one of those players which you're like, they should have. It would have been great to see him play in round 0. Unfortunately, we didn't get that opportunity, and they will have the round 4 bye. So even though they didn't play in round 0, they have the round 4 bye. And I think this is one of those really bad sort of unfortunate parts of the Essendon and Gold Coast rookies, because 1, we didn't get to see them play, but 2, they don't have that earlier cash generation that we would have otherwise had. So if Sardis had played on the weekend and he scored 80, then that's an 80-point boost you basically have in terms of cash generation over all the other non-round 0 rookies. But we just didn't get that luxury. I still think that even with Darcy Parish in the side, that Sartis has now been given a definitive role. If you told me last year if this was the same Sartis, would I have picked him? I would have said no. The kicking has certainly improved. And I think we've seen with Supercoach, those butchers don't really score well. I can now see a world where Sartis isn't necessarily in that mold. He has certainly improved his game quite a lot. And I think for that reason is why I'm happy to start him on field. Finn O'Sullivan. So this is one of those rookies that sort of wasn't on our radar much before the Amy Community Series game. But I think now that we've sort of seen that Community Series game, it was a tale of two halves. The first half, he was playing sort of on that wing. But then one thing that we saw, and we've seen it with North rookies of years gone by as well, is the fact that he sort of floated back into defence, played a key structure in the defensive back 7. And if past seasons are to go by, I can see Alistair Clarkson going back to that same well that he did with Harry Sheasel and that he did with Colby McCurchan, putting Finn O'Sullivan back there, expose him to the ball. And maybe it's just a gut selection in this way, but I can see obviously Finn O'Sullivan, as their highly touted number 2 pick, should have good job security. If he's playing in that defensive half-back role, he should have good scoring potential. And that's really the role, isn't it? Is that if he can have a sustained run in the team, he should be able to average 65, and that would get us enough money to upgrade him. Mitch Nevitt is the other one. Again, we didn't get the opportunity to see him in round 0. But the good thing is that he doesn't have the buy-in round sort of in that early season. And that means that they will be playing Brisbane at the Gabba, albeit it's a tough game. But even with Bailey Smith to come back in, Chris Scott has been adamant that Mitch Nevitt is a part of their plans long-term. And I can't see why any of that would change over a couple of weeks, even with Bailey Smith back in. We've seen with Tanner Brun, with sort of the allegations hanging over his head, as well, is just something that we should be monitoring from a Supercoach lens, but I think that should all play in the favour of Nevitt getting an extended run in the team. And given his sort of pedigree, he scored 200 in Supercoach last year in the VFL as well. He has the scoring pedigree. He has the profile to be a good Supercoach rookie for us. And I think that this will be really beneficial for us as a long-term cash generating option in our side. Then with Levi Ashcroft, I'm not really going to talk much about why he's in the team. I'm sort of going to talk more about why he's on the bench. And the reason being is DR would probably be the best person to ask about this, but that Brisbane side is a very tough one to crack into. He had that shoulder surgery in the preseason, and so I'm just a bit hesitant in putting him on field in round 1 because of the fact that he may sort of cop an injury, or he may get subbed out early in a game, which is something that is possible for all of these players. I'm just thinking about players that have had an interrupted preseason, and I really haven't tried to go with any sort of premiums that have had an interrupted preseason, but more so the rookie here in Levi Ashcroft, who has had that interrupted preseason. So I'm just a little bit hesitant to put him on field in round 1, but in a best 18 round, I would be more than comfortable putting him on field because he more than likely won't count towards the best 18 scores, but he does have the potential, as we saw in that Amy Community Series game with low CBAs, only 20% CBAs, but to score an 80 is really promising. And I think that's a really good tick for Levi Ashcroft there. I'm not going to go with more high-priced rookies on the bench, but what I will be doing is I'll be going with Angus Hastie at M10, and then make sure you get this one right, Lucas Campariali. So Hastie is a defender, plays as a defender for the Saints, so he should be getting defender DPP status come the end of round 6, and he's just he's a great player. I've watched both the practice match that they played against Carlton and then the Amy Community Series game they played against Port Adelaide, and Hastie was a player that impressed me in both games. He's an intercepting type. He can get those intercept marks and he can also rebound the ball. I think he's going to fit perfectly in Ross Lyon's system, and seeing him ahead of like an Irish Shonmaker who has high reps on him is a really good sign. And so I think as a cash generating rookie on the bench, he may not see my Supercoach field often unless he shows me otherwise, but I think he's just a player that you just want to have there as well. And then Lucas Campriali. I think this is a really good feel-good story for the Blues, given he's a father-son player, the son of Scott. And the best part about this is I think he's definitely ahead of Jackson Binns, and he may be ahead of Sam Doherty. We'll wait and see when teams drop on Thursday. But I think there's three key parts to why I like this pick. Firstly, he plays a very specialized role on the wing. And if we go back to last year, whilst watching Carlton games, it's almost like we either have an injury in the first quarter or the second quarter and that player gets subbed out, or we sub off one of the small forwards who's that dynamic, or the small forward who's the boomerang player that goes in and out of centre bounce, like a Lockie Fogarty, like a Corey Durden, those types. I can't see us subbing out Lucas Campriali or making him the sub. And the other reason why I really like this pick is that I saw enough in that game against GWS to say that he'll get a prolonged stint in the side because he's now replacing Ollie Hollands on that wing. There's a specific need for a winger into this side, and I was wondering whether it would be a Jackson Binns, a Sam Doherty, and Matty Cottrell. But I think now Campriali has sort of usurped all of them, and he's going to occupy that wing alongside Blake Acres. And then the third reason I talked about with Adam Chera is given the fact that he has this soft fixture to start, a winger playing soft fixtures is a dream scenario. And playing Richmond, West Coast, North Melbourne in the first 6 games, I think is a really good way in which we can see Campriali build that scoring base to possibly even become an on-field rookie. We'll wait and see. In terms of the Ruckman, I'm not going to talk too much about them, but I'm just going to go sort of set and forget in a way with Cherry and De Koning. It really depends how you view De Koning, whether you view him as a stepping stone, as sort of a keeper. But I really like De Koning as a selection. The reason being is, like, yes, Pitternet may come into the side, but I think we cross that bridge when we get there. Even when he does come back in, is it in round 20? Is it in round 6? But without actually knowing when Pitternet comes back into the team, and I've talked about this a lot on the Swordplay podcast, is that the Pitternet selection, I feel, it impinges a lot on the Charlie Curnow health factor. When Curnow's in, Mackay normally plays the second key forward. And if we're going to run with Brody Kemp as the third tall, there's no real reason, or definitely no real reason, to play Pitternet when that really decreases the speed profile off the team. So I think De Koning, we even saw against GWS, yes, he was going up against Lockie Keefe, and we saw what Darcy Cameron did to Lockie Keefe as well. But I think De Koning is just one of those players that you want to start. Tristan Cherry as well. 14 tackles in an Amy Community Series game just goes to show me how much off a ceiling this guy sort of has. But also, more than the ceiling, I think it's the floor that he sort of provides by having those tackle numbers. Because when you have those tackle numbers in the preseason, that should continue into the regular season as well. It's one of those picks where you could probably fade. And look, I've definitely tinkered with it. Thinking about sort of Toby Nankervis, Max Gawn. He plays Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, Gold Coast, Carlton in sort of the, before Carlton, Gold Coast in those first sort of 5 games. And he'll probably drop in price. But I think with Cherry, one of the things we need to consider, yes, he's probably going to drop in price, but is he actually going to get to a situation where you can start, where you can pick him up at a price which aligns perfectly with the time that you want to bring him in? I can't really see a reason why Cherry will regress. Maybe he does regress from those tackle numbers, but there's other indicators which allow him to progress going forward into this season. That's to do more so not with the last 5 games, but some of the games in here. He did have a little bit of inconsistency with some 90s, but if 90s are the floor for Cherry, then I'm happy to pay up for that. Yes, it's not 650K worth, but it's one of those players where you're going to want him in at some point in your side. It's very similar to Harry Sheezel as well. They don't present value, but there's just one of those kinds of players where if you don't start them, you're going to have to bring them in, and it may hinder your ability to do a better sort of fallen premium upgrade in that specific week. Max Gawn against GWS in this upcoming week, possibly against Lockie Keefe, is a matchup that I am very scared of, and he'll probably is just watch out. He may be a number one captaincy option this week, particularly if he is going up against Lockie Keith. Maybe if it's Nick Madden, it's more of the unknown, but I really can't see a world where Cherry doesn't towel up whoever he plays. Gorn doesn't towel up whoever he plays this week. But I think equally, Tristan Cherry should be toweling up Tim English this week as well. A very favourable matchup, and he's going to probably feature very prominently in our captaincy discussion for this week. And then I think you can sort of consider a couple of more options moving forward in the weeks that Cherry has tougher matchups. Toby Nankervis was the other option that I have had in here. He loves a handball from his midfielders, which is something that's a bit, you don't really think about happening for Ruckman, but great selection. And anyone that goes with Nank, I don't really blame them in that regard either. My R3 is going to be someone that I feel like every team sort of has. It's either Harry Boyd or Archer Reed in this position. I've gone with Harry Boyd just for the fact that now Cooper Sharman is sort of Cooper Sharman's injured start season, so is Max King, and Mitch Owens is touch and go. I think that Harry Boyd may actually take up the number one ruck mantle with Rowan Marshall coming into the side and playing as a key forward, just given the fact of the scarcity of the key position players that St Kilda have. And I think, yes, we may not get as much cash generation as we want out of him as if he was playing as a sole ruckman, but I saw enough from Harry Boyd in both the practice match against Carlton and the Amy Community Series game against Port Adelaide, where he was double teamed by Soldo and Sweet, actually, to suggest that he could be a decent enough rookie option for us going forward. I'm now going to move into, before that, I'll just talk about the flex very quickly. So that's going to be Matt Flynn. Now, I know people are on and off about the Matt Flynn pick. Yes, he may not be the greatest sort of have the best injury history, and that can go for a certain number of players in this team as well. But what we saw from Matt Flynn against Tristan Cherry, in particular in the Amy Community Series game, I saw him take up front position. I saw him travel the ground well. He even took a strong mark up forward, taking Cherry forward for the ball, which is a weakness of Cherry I saw a couple of times last year as well. And seeing Matt Flynn expose that and use that to his strength was something that was really promising. And 262K, yes, there's a bit of uncertainty as to what the ruck split will look like. On the against North Melbourne in the Community Series game, Flynn was had 85% of ruck contests, and then he was Archer Reed, and then it was BJ Williams. I can't really see a world where Flynn is healthy that he doesn't have the number one ruck position based off of that, even with Oscar Allen to come back into the team. And look, if Matt Flynn isn't named in round one, then we go to our plan B. And that plan B would be a Hugo Garcia here, who won't be in my forward line. But yeah, it's just something to consider, something to play around with. But I'm pretty confident that Matt Flynn, if he stays healthy for 6 to 7 week period, that he can sort of build up the cash generation, make us a good 100 to 150K, and possibly be even a hold until the buyers, depending on how he goes. But look, I'm not sort of keeping my hopes up on this pick, but it's just a player that I want to get a piece of, a starting ruckman at 260K, basically. And so, yes, now let's move on into the forward line. I did mention again before that there's 6 teams that I want a piece of their midfield from that have a good fixture run, either to start the season or throughout the season itself. And that's Adelaide, Brisbane, Carlton, Fremantle, Gold Coast, Port Adelaide. So I've got Carlton with Chera. I've got Fremantle with Brayshaw. I've got Brisbane with Lockie Neal. The 2 players that I want to pick up from Port Adelaide and from Adelaide, respectively, are the players that I believe will be the F1 and F2 if right now these are the forwards that we had to choose from, and that's Jason Horne-Francis and Isaac Rankin. Horne-Francis, there's not much really to speak about him. I think his stocks go up even more now with Zach Butters injured to start the season. And when we look at this sort of starting fixture, when you play Richmond and then North Melbourne, as well as even St Kilda to a degree, given that their midfield just doesn't look perfect at the moment, I think he's just a player that you want to start. And then going forward is a player that we really could see him be, I would say, a 60-40 midfield split. Possibly. I have him projected at around 65% CBAs for Port Adelaide. That was even with Butters in the side. I really think that that when we think about Ken Hinkley and the way that he wants to structure this team, we didn't really see a lot of Butters, Horne-Francis and Rosie in the one centre bounce together. And we still may not see those guys in the same centre bounce together when you've got Willem Drew and when you've got Ollie Wines in the team. But I think Jason Horne-Francis is just one of those players where You want to start because he's so dynamic. And yes, he didn't have the greatest season last year. There's no real scores that sort of blow you out of the water, and you could probably get him at a cheaper price. But I think it's too much of a risk to go against him, especially when Butters is not in the side there. Isaac Rankin is the other one. And yes, he probably didn't have the score from a fantasy footy lens that you would have wanted to see to say is a lock in the side. But I saw enough from Rankin to say that he is, if he plays around the ball like he did against Brisbane, he wasn't simply starting at CBAs and then going forward like you've got your Dusties, your Jordan De Goeys off years gone by. But Isaac Rankin was playing around the ball. He was traveling around the ground as a midfielder. And that is a dangerous proposition. It's almost like once bitten, twice shy. Yes, I have a bit of trepidation with the Rankin pick, and he could easily become sort of split into two mid prices that I'll talk about very soon. But he's a player that can generally play 90% time on ground when he's healthy. He had a score of 90 in about 70% time on ground against Brisbane, playing in that exclusive midfield role in the Community Series. And I think with Adelaide's fixture run as well, St Kilda, Essendon, North Melbourne, Gold Coast, Geelong, teams that are quite sort of fruitful in terms of their midfield sort of splits in the way that they defend teams. I can't really see sort of Rankin having a poor game to start of the season. And yes, he may drop in price. And this is what Isaac Rankin does. He gets to an affordable price. But it's one of those players where I would feel more comfortable starting than getting onto after a hot start to the season, simply because of that injury risk that he possesses with those hamstrings. So much like Chera, I'd much rather start a Chera and a Rankin than have to bring them in. At my F3, then, I'm going to go down to Jack Macrae. Look, I don't really have much to talk about. When I was talking about Clary before, Jack Macrae was the other player that I wanted to go hand in hand there. Supercoach royalty of years gone by. He now has the hunger. He has the rollback playing inside midfield, and he has sort of that willingness to call for the ball. We see it, the tackle hunger as well. A player that simply is too much of a lock to really even consider any other option in that way. I'm then going to go to another lock, another player that has sort of green pastures. And one thing you may see is that I've skipped over Bailey Smith and Riley Sanders. And when I was talking about Isaac Rankin being able to be split into two mid prizes, those two were the ones I was talking about. So Isaac Rankin could very simply become a Bailey Smith and a Riley Sanders if I just did a little bit of rejigging in the other lines. But yeah, so with Bailey Smith and Riley Sanders, the two red flags that I just have is with Bailey Smith, yes, he's been able to play 90% time on ground in years gone by, but he has never sort of really got scored into like that 110 range, even with the 90%, 95% time on ground. So now playing in the Geelong system that really doesn't sort of facilitate midfielders that have more than 70% CBAs. We haven't seen that really in a couple of years with Geelong, and we haven't seen sort of high-end, consistent scoring from any of their midfielders for a long period of time. That's one of the reasons even why I'm a bit hesitant to start like a Max Holmes in that regard as well. So, look, I'm not saying that Bailey Smith is a bad pick by any means. I just feel that if I would prefer an Isaac Rankin that I know can score 110 on a good day compared to a Bailey Smith who may only get to 110 off about 35 touches just because of the way that his scoring is structured. And look, Geelong is a great place for him to go and sort of flesh out his Supercoach game as well. But again, I feel much like I talked about with Will Danfield Callahan, I would much rather sort of trade into him after seeing a couple of games that we get to see from him before his price rise, rather than jumping on right now. And with Riley Sanders, there was just something about that Hawks Amy Community Series game that just didn't sit right with me. It wasn't so much the role. The role was really good, and he's probably the number one or number two mid now, along with Libba, depending on if Ed Richards comes back in until the Bont and Treloar come back in. But with Riley Sanders, the interesting part to it was that he had the role, but he just didn't have the hunger for the role. It was like he had been given the role, but he just doesn't have the tools quite yet to utilize it. The high handball to kick ratio. So I think it was 5 kicks to 16 handballs. Yes, for an in and under player that may be possible, but it's just not what you really want to come to expect from a player like a Riley Sanders in that way. And so if I do choose to opt out of Rankin to go with a Bailey Smith and a Riley Sanders, I think there is enough justification there to either start them or to not start them. It just depends on the team structure. That's probably the last thing which I'm tinkering about, is whether to go with the 2 premium forwards or whether to go with Horne-Francis and the mid-prices, basically. So at F5, I've got a player that is probably going to, again, be one of those beneficiaries from the soft fixture run. It's Sam Powell-Pepper. And look, I'll be the first to say that it wasn't really on my radar for much of the preseason, but it's sort of come onto the radar in the last couple of weeks. He's part of the leadership group at Port Adelaide, and I tend to play a key part or understanding into the leadership roles at clubs, because now you don't have Sack Butters, the vice captain, off the club. Someone will have to step up from a leadership board, and may it be Powell-Pepper. He's priced at 181k. And when we look at his sort of scoring over the last couple of years, there's nothing sort of going to blow you away, but he's averaged 67, 74, 69, 75. So he does have scoring pedigree. And with a break even of 33, he probably only needs to average 60 to be a good pick. But the thing that, again, I really want to go back to is that fixture where he plays Collingwood. And we saw what GWS did to Collingwood on the weekend. Not saying it's going to be the exact same, but we only have 1 week of data to go off of. Richmond at Adelaide Oval, plus matchup. Essendon and Marvel, let's say a neutral matchup given that midfield, but also the way that Powell-Pepper will probably play in and around the ball, not as a midfielder, but going up to stoppages and then sort of being the general forward. Play St Kilda, should be a plus matchup then. Then Hawthorn Sydney is tough. But look, he may have already done his job by that point, depending on how that Richmond matchup goes. And so I feel comfortable enough to start him and put him as an on-field pick. It's just a matter of, and this is where I feel I would prefer Powell-Pepper to be the F6 more than the F5. And that's why I'm really considering whether to split Rankin into 2 mid-prices and sort of flesh out the scoring in the forward line rather than putting sort of all my eggs in one basket with Rankin there. In terms of the other sort of forward rookies, I'm going to go with Sam Davidson at F6. I'll talk about these guys, Isaac Kako, and then the other one is Connor Stone. So Sam Davidson is, we saw sort of the benefits and the downfalls of playing full-time wing in that matchup against Hawthorn in the Amy Community Series. You basically have the ball, perhaps a whole of one half, and he looks like gold. And then the second half, when he only has 4 touches compared to the 23 in the first half, it's like rotten, basically. But I feel like Davidson is a Bevo player. Yes, he's probably the best forward rookie we have in terms of stability. But look, I think Davidson should make us enough money. And we saw that he's sort of an ultimate professional and has been, I think, was inside the kennel when speaking with DR, or mentioned that Sam Davidson was one to watch out for round 1 debut a couple of months ago. And now, given the plethora of injuries that the Doggies have, Davidson should be locked in on that wing. Isaac Kako is a player that, as we were talking about with the previous Dons rookies with Zach Reed and Sarters, is a bit disappointing that you don't get to see him in round 0 and what he can really do. But Kako is one of those players that I'm comfortable being a slow burn on my midfield, on my forward bench moving forward. The reason being is that, like, I think 70% of the competition own him. And look, Kako, there's not really too many better forward rookie options. Yes, you have like a Joe Berry type. Tom Lynch is another player that we've typically seen key forwards have a spike game and then sort of go out of the blocks. And he could be an option. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the injury history. And he's sort of had a couple of preseason interruptions, Tom Lynch, that is. But Kako sort of feels like just a safe pick. He'll get good job security. He should get good run. The fixture isn't great when you play Hawthorn, Port Adelaide, Melbourne even. But then perhaps when you got West Coast and North Melbourne in a 3-week stretch, perhaps that's when Kako can capitalize. And that DPP is also really handy. And potentially if another forward rookie pops up and I can move Kako into the midfield and trade out one of those midfield rookie options. So it's just play, sort of rolling the dice on a spike score from Kako. But I feel like we do that with a lot of rookies anyway. I just like the job security. And then even if he is a slow burn, that's okay. And then Connor Stone. So Connor Stone was one of those players when I was talking about James Leake before, playing in the revolving door of the Giants with so much depth in there. Connor Stone is in the team because I saw enough from him on the weekend to suggest that he should get a good run of things. Now, look, he didn't sort of shoot the lights out. 64 is decent enough. But the thing that sort of stood out to me for Stone is that he played 70% time on ground, and that's compared to 54% for James Leake, and they both played full games. With sort of Connor Stone, only 11 touches, 4 marks, two sort of tackles, but he got to a 64, and that shows his scoring pedigree in a way as well. I feel like when you got Tom Green, Jesse Hogan, and the sort of Mad Monday group or crop to come back in, Stone feels like the player that sort of won't be impacted necessarily, given that he's playing as sort of defender, sort of moving up a little bit up the ground as well. But he showed enough on the weekend to suggest that he should have semi-decent job security. At worst, he may be able to be used as a loop when GWS have the round 2 bye, and that's the only GWS or Gold Coast player I have in this team. And so that allows the VCC loophole in that way. So there's my team. There's $8,100 left over, which may or may not be handy. I wish I had a little bit more left over, but let's just save that team for now. Chuck the emergencies on these players. And then going into sort of, I just want to touch on a couple of other players that aren't in the team, and that's Nick Dacos. So Nick Dacos was a player that actually hadn't been in my team since the team picker actually opened. And the reason being, and we saw it on the weekend as well, when you score 66, he was bound to get tagged. But now it really opens up an opportunity for those that don't have him or don't plan to start him to be able to get him in. And when you play Port Adelaide, Carlton, Sydney, Brisbane in that first sort of 5-week block, I just don't really see a reason to sort of jump the gun on bringing a Nick Dacos in. Yes, he may have a really good game against the Bulldogs, as he normally does play well against them, 121 average in 3 games against them. But then you look at that, Carlton only 96 and Sydney only 86. Let's wait and see what Dacos does against Port Adelaide and Western Bulldogs, and then be able to assess when we can sort of bring him in, because I think he's one of those players that you want to have, because he's one of the best players in the competition, Supercoach and in real life as well. But I think we can almost wait and sort of hazard our planning of round starting, around bringing in Dacos in around that round 7 to round 8 mark, because there's a really friendly fixture run coming up when he plays sort of Adelaide, North Melbourne, St Kilda, West Coast in that stretch, and that's in and around that bye period as well. But I feel like we can almost bring him in earlier as well. Connor Rozee is an interesting one. So I was sort of toying him up. Him and Jordan Dawson were 2 that have sort of been floating in and out of the side, but I think I've sort of settled on Lachie Neale and Andy Brayshaw being the pillars in that midfield. So that's why I've gone there. Nothing wrong with Rozee, but that stubbed foot as well. I have more confidence in Horne-Francis as a pick than Rozee, and I just don't feel comfortable starting both of them for whatever reason. With Rozee, he may move forward, but he looks so good in that Amy Community Series game. It's really hard not to get sucked in by a performance like that. I just think that Brayshaw and Neale are more likely to finish top 8 midfield than Rozee is. And Rozee's priced about 80K more than Oliver and Chera. So if you start Rozee, you're probably looking at him as a top 8 option, more so than a stepping stone in that way. And then I've got James Peatling and Ollie Hollands written down here as well. Both of them really good. I mean, around the 330, 350K mark. Peatling is a tough one. I want a piece of the Adelaide midfield, and I think Rankin is the way to go just with that positional scarcity as a forward. Peatling will probably be a good pick, and his tackle numbers were quite low against Adelaide. It's interesting to see whether or not they start Sid Draper, because I think when Sid Draper plays, there's only so many CBAs to go around. So perhaps Sid Draper negatively impacts James Peatling in that way. But I don't see that so much happening if Sid Draper doesn't play. And perhaps if Sid Draper doesn't play, I may sort of switch a little bit of the structure around. Like I was saying, splitting Rankin into Sanders, and then going up from one of those midfield rookies. But I really like those the high-priced midfield rookies, those 5, O'Sullivan, O'Driscoll, Sartis, Nevitt, Ashcroft there. Ollie Hollands is the other one. Look, Hollands should be a good enough pick. And when we think about his price, he's priced at 62. That means for him to make 150K, probably needs to average 90. And yes, they do a friendly fixture run. We do have a friendly fixture run in Richmond, West Coast, North Melbourne. I keep banging on about this. But look, I've always seen that the knock on him has been his kicking. And the fact that he doesn't really demand enough of the ball. And I didn't see enough of it in the preseason. Sort of in the first team reveal I had him in, because I saw that in some of the intra-club footage. But again, in the Amy Community Series game, when everyone else was having a picnic, kicking the ball around, Ollie just didn't want to get involved. And I think we can almost wait and see how he looks in those first couple of rounds before making any decisions before the round 3 game against the Bulldogs there. Just to finish up, I'm just going to quickly talk about plans moving forward. So Tristan Cherry will probably be the captain in week 1. I really love the matchup against Tim English there. And the other sort of thing, the other option, Smokey, that I have in here is Tom De Koning as well. Tom De Koning playing against Richmond. Carlton should probably be toweling the Tigers up. But look, let's hope it's a good enough matchup for the first game of round 1 as well. And I guess this sort of comes back to why I want to start a Cherry or a Gorn type at R1, because in round 1, when teams are going mid-price mayhem, you sort of bottleneck yourself into picking a captain that isn't really the best option in a way. Like Lachie Neale playing Sydney, probably not a player that I'm looking to captain in round 1, because he may cop the James Jordan tag. So it's probably between Cherry and De Koning for the captaincy armband, and I'm leaning towards Cherry in that regard there. So as I mentioned, Nick Dacos is a player that I'm looking off as an early sort of player to bring in. Another player I'm looking at is Christian Petrarca. He was also very close to making this side. He just looked so good, and he didn't want to, obviously when you're thinking about Petrarca with those rib issues, is you just hope that he doesn't shirk any contests, and I didn't see that against Fremantle. So that's a really promising sign. If he plays forward, perhaps, then that could be an even more promising sign, because we could look to get him in as a DPP option. And we saw that from Chad Warner on the weekend as well. Chad Warner was playing a bit up forward as well. So potentially we could see Chad Warner as a forward DPP there. But look, that sort of brings a wrap to the team reveal. There may be some moving parts, but I'm trying to be as transparent with you guys as possible. The main moving part would probably be, and this is the part I'm still not sure on, is whether Isaac Rankin sticks in the team, or I split that into 2 mid-prices, going fully mid-price mayhem. But I'll obviously provide you guys with updates across the week. And I think before I finish up, just 2 housekeeping things. Firstly, as you guys can see in the bottom left corner, our Supercoach Swordplay guide has been out for a couple of weeks now. Look, if you haven't got yours yet, please do yourself a service and get one. You can go to supercoachswordplay.com to get your season guide. The reason being why we say it's a season guide, it's not just focused on preseason content. Yes, you have the preseason articles, how to pick a starting team in there, but you've also got in-season articles as well. Our predictions for the CBA percentages at each club, how to pick the best captain each week, sort of rookie advice on how to sort of maximize your trades and then build up your cash cows to sort of sell high, buy low, that sort of thing. So make sure to get your Supercoach season guide. You can go to the Supercoach, www.supercoachswordplay.com, and then you can buy a season guide as well as some fresh merch, which we have. We've got rugby jumpers, which will be debuting in a couple of weeks as well. So make sure to get on that. Go and follow Third Man Up. We just put out our first rookie data dump today. So that's really exciting. It's got about 60 or so players in there. So make sure you go and have a look at our verdict on each of the rookies. On Tuesday, we'll have the Captain's Corner coming out as well. So that's something which you guys can be looking for. The first one for the year. I feel like Maxi Gorn and Tristan Cherry will feature very highly in that. And then the last thing, the second last thing, Swordplay Open League. The code is 503052. So if you haven't joined that yet, make sure to join. We have some great prizes for the winners, sort of the top 3 that finish in that group. And the final thing which I want to sort of bring you guys' attention to is something exciting is something very exciting is coming up in the next couple of weeks. It may be a partnership with a group that I feel like you guys will be very, very interested in. So stay tuned for that. We'll drop more information in the coming week or so. But look, I hope that all of your team plan is going really well, and that like me, that you guys sort of get into a position where on Thursday night, you see the teams that drop and you're sort of not shocked, but you can sort of plan accordingly. Make sure to do plenty of additions off your team as well, just to make sure you're tinkering around with the right players and the right structure. But most importantly, make sure that one round doesn't define you. The way round one goes doesn't mean that your team is rubbish or anything. You don't need to upheave it. You don't need to quit Supercoach. Just take a round by round. There's been plenty of good examples like DI and myself a couple of years ago when we were both outside the top 80K at the end of round one, but we both came home to finish in the top 1K. So make sure that you guys are just stay healthy, stay happy, and don't let Supercoach dictate your lives. I think that's really important amongst the fantasy communities. But yes, please take care. Good luck Supercoaching and good luck putting your starting team together. Look forward to catching all of you guys for the second now, but the first in-season Supercoach Swordplay podcast with all the boys next Tuesday. Take care, guys.